Welcome back to the McDowell Phillips House project. As you know, we've been here since March of 2020, documenting the preservation and restoration of the house. Things are starting to come back together. I know Brian and the Historical Society are getting excited to reopen the house eventually as a museum. Here we are in the turret room of the house, the formal parlor, and volunteer Paul Wood has done an amazing job hanging this beautiful, iconic wallpaper designed originally by William Morris, who was an English designer who really was the father of the arts and crafts design movement, which eventually came to America. So this paper, I think Brian shared with me earlier, is one of the most iconic patterns of wallpaper of all time. It's William Morris, and the pattern is Pimpernel. What I really love about it is it brings together kind of the feeling of this room. It pulls out the greens and the blues and the turquoise of this fireplace surround. And it really kind of sets the stage for the period of this room. As you can see, furniture has been put back in place. And Brian, I believe you said that these are believed to be original pieces to the family in the house?
Some of the descendants, the Rowe family, indicates these were originally in the house. It is unusual to find two matching settees like this, but they both appear to be in good shape. This room, of course, being a more formal room, probably didn't see the wear and tear as other parts of the house did, but it's quite a find. One piece was upstairs in the bedroom, the other piece was against the wall down here, so we're really happy to kind of bring the two together and really show what a formal parlor of the day would have looked like.
Yeah.
And behind Matt is an Edison cylinder player, which precedes the vinyl disc, and that actually plays small cylinders about 5 inches long. And we have quite a collection here, the family.
Oh, cool.
There's probably 50 or 60 cylinders in a trunk nearby.
Yeah.
So that would have been an entertainment source. Of course, you have the fireplace, you have a piano. The family did have an upright player piano here for many years. And now we have, on loan from the Phillips family, the beautiful grand piano that's also a player piano in the room. So it's going to be a wonderful entertainment venue for us.
Absolutely. Well, one of the things that we've been documenting through this series is the renovation of the rooms and putting up period-appropriate wallpaper. But there's one room in the house that we really aren't quite sure what it originally looked like, but there are some clues, and that's what we're going to look at today. So Brian, let's go into the entry hall and kind of take a look at that shell motif and see if we can figure out what's going on.
Sure.
So Brian, the entry hall we know was kind of the heart of the house. It was the first impression when guests came in. As we learned earlier, this was also the heart of the holiday celebration and Christmas parties. And one of the things that we're trying to figure out, many of the rooms in the house were renovated or changed when the house was apartments. But we feel that this room is still pretty original. One of the mysteries is, if you see up on the wall, there's this shell and ribbon design it's kind of a raised, sanded stencil, effectively. What's kind of interesting is this design is also found in that big stained glass window up on the landing of the staircase. So we're going to do a little bit of hands-on scraping and see what's underneath this. We don't know if this is original. Remember, there was a massive fire in the house in 1903. And we don't know if this room was changed at that point. There's some little bit of water damage we can kind of see. But what's interesting, when you go up and look, if we look between the ceiling, and we'll get a close shot of this, you can see this shell and ribbon design. It's not painted out necessarily, but it's definitely three-dimensional. But then we get up here, and we know that in the 70s, I believe, Brian, you said, when this was part of the apartment, someone came through and painted over this. So we are going to do a little bit of damage today to see what's here, but remember that this whole room has to be redone anyway.
That's right, Matt. And remember, this house was rentals with 4 apartments for many, many years. And one of the tenants that did live here in the 1970s actually came back and visited us a few months ago. And she indicated that she could feel the bumps of the design, and she painted it very carefully using her fingers and light brush strokes to recreate that design. And at the time, Mr. Phillips, Grandpa Phillips, if you will, Drew's grandfather, who was the landlord basically, was so pleased to see this design come back and see it again, which tells us it was probably painted over at some point, but we just don't know how or when. And if it was original to the house, it's seen some plaster damages and repairs over the years, as well as paint.
So Brian, what's interesting, as you're talking and I'm scraping, I'm not there is a design. Now that I give a little bit out, you can see, but it's not this, it's actually over a little bit. So that shell, I mean, this is absolutely here. But what's interesting, the shell that was painted is here, but the center of the design is here. I can't tell, now you can see it, I think that this was originally a stencil. And I know
With a heavy oil paint, perhaps, or something that would give it some...
Garmin and Farrell are probably having heart attacks right now. But you can see, so I think the original stencil is here. It was just modified. I'm gonna grab another scraper. Sorry about the mess here, Brian.
That's okay. We have a shop vac. We use it every day.
So oftentimes, in Victorian homes, stenciling was very popular. A lot of times people think of it as a less expensive way to do things, but it kind of fits in exactly with that arts and crafts design. And I know we've said this is a shingle house, but they all kind of meld together in different ways. So by hand crafting or hand stenciling this, it was another way for hands-on artists and crafters and decorators to put designs into the house. So Brian, I don't know if you can see from down there, but like right here is absolutely that ribbon. And then, I don't know if you can see kind of the outline of the shell there.
I see, yeah.
And then the ribbon going up. So I think that this is the original wall finish. It's kind of this muddy, putty, pinkish color. And I would wonder if this shell and ribbon was originally gold leafed or gilded, so it would give off that beautiful light when the gas lights were going, you know, and kind of reflect what was going on.
Interesting.
So absolutely, it's here. You know, so this is something, this is actually a room in the house. In a lot of the other rooms, the Historical Society has had to guess at what was perhaps on the walls. But this is a room that you could actually restore. You know, a lot of the other ones have been renovations or guesses. But this one, absolutely, we have what I would think to be the original wall design existing as a stencil, something that could be replicated, and you could actually take this room back to 1890 and what it looked like.
Well, Matt, you certainly uncovered one of our biggest mysteries here, and as he said earlier, this is just the last of the major rooms that we were coming to figure out what it was supposed to look like, or what should we do with fragmented stenciling work. And now that we see more detail, we have a better guideline as to what to do next. So good job, Matt. And you're getting a real in-process view of what it's like to work in an old house and sometimes the mysteries around it, which is very interesting.
From high school sports to community events and beyond, you can find all of your favorite local shows on the Armstrong Neighborhood Channel.
Hi, I'm Kristen Gambassini from Craft Table. You can check out my show as well as other local favorites such as Medina Minute, Cooking with Kelly, and Leisure and Literature on Armstrong Neighborhood Channel.
Check us out right now on Channel 100, or search Armstrong Neighborhood Channel on YouTube for playlists and much more. Spirit, town pride, community. This is the Armstrong Neighborhood Channel.
So what we were able to uncover is what I believe to be the original stencil and kind of design that was on the wall, which is then replicated in the ceiling. What's kind of cool about this room, it's a very masculine, massive room, and it wouldn't have been likely wallpapered like the parlor, which is a little bit more feminine with the stained glass and the more Victorian-styled fireplace. One other place we want to check is on another wall. On either side of this arch, you can almost see a pattern or something in the wall, and we're not sure if that's plaster repair or if there was almost a mural that came down. So we're gonna go over by the radiator where some other paint is flaking off and see if we can uncover any more clues over there. The other place we wanna do a little bit of scraping and investigating is on this wall. And honestly, the only reason we're picking this wall is because the paint is already flaking off. So as we saw on the other side, the original design is here, but we're not sure, did that carry down? Was there something? So we're gonna take some of this off. And what's interesting about this wall is it has like a sanded, textured finish to it. Not totally uncommon, but kind of just an interesting choice. So to me, just from what I'm seeing, Brian, I don't think that there was any other decorative painting on the wall. So I think what you had is this putty colored wall, and then probably a gilded stencil, whether it was gold powder or bronze powder or something that was kind of tamped on here. You know, so that would really kind of bring this room together in the warmth that would have been very common for a shingle style house of this era.
Well, Matt, I think it's a very interesting discovery, and that's one thing, as we mentioned, has been kind of challenging us all along as to what to do with this room to not only improve it, but address some of the shortcomings he just indicated. A lot of loose plaster and things like that. We did note water damage, as you mentioned earlier, of the doorway here, possibly from the 1903 fire, because there's no other water source in this part of the house. So a lot of mysteries yet to uncover, but we're getting there. As Matt destroys it. No.
Well, I'm going to stop destroying because I could stay here all day. This is just too much fun. So what we'd like to do is, there's been some work going on upstairs in the maid's quarters, and let's take a look at that. But Brian, since we just uncovered this again, or uncovered the original, let's go back up on the staircase landing and talk again about that massive window and the drawings that we found last time, that you guys found. And let's tie those two things together.
Okay. Thank God we have shop vacs.
I know, sorry.
That's okay. That's the least of my worries, believe me.
In 1903, we know that there was a fire in the house that started in the back and carried up through the attic and really kind of concentrated on this front corner of the house. That certainly would have affected the stained glass window here in the landing. So we can see that perhaps some of this lighter green glass is part of the repair. But what we want to focus on is, if you look at this bottom panel, there's that same shell motif that we saw downstairs in that stencil in the parlor. And then in the top, under that laurel wreath, are those same ribbons. So it's kind of cool that this window and the parlor, or the entryway, had the same design motif, kind of tie that all together. Now what we don't know, and probably will never know, as Brian was talking, the McDowells were huge Civil War veterans. They were very involved in the war. H.D. Blake was involved with President Lincoln at the time. And we don't know, was this wreath perhaps in honor or memory, or is it a peace symbol? Those are things that maybe will eventually come out when you go through everything in the attic.
Yes.
It certainly wasn't made clear in the letter that you found a couple weeks ago in that drawing. It's just another mystery of the house that hopefully over time we'll be able to figure out.
I think that R.M. McDowell, who was a lieutenant in the Army during the Civil War, the fact that he kept every one of his papers just about from their daily requisitions and inventories and things like that, he must have felt this was a very significant part of his life, which I'm sure it was.
Right.
And perhaps the laurel was his way of honoring fallen soldiers and all those that gave their all during the Civil War. I think it can have a rather romantic, historic interpretation, I think. And I think when he came time to design this house, even though it was some 25 years after the war, it must have been still very vivid in his memory.
Absolutely.
I think there's more to tell. As we discover more, we hope to kind of close the loop on some of these mysteries in this house.
These little stories. So some work has been going on at the back of the house in the maid's quarters. Brian, why don't we go back and check out what the volunteers have been doing?
Sure.
The McDowell family was certainly one of considerable means in Medina at the turn of the 19th to the 20th century. In a house of this size and the entertaining that they did in their position in society, we know that they would have had staff on hand in the house to help out. Brian, what were some of the discoveries that you made in this room? How do you think this was originally used? And do you know anything about the staff and the help that lived here?
Well, we know they had several. It's often mentioned in their letters, and especially the Christmas letter, where even an additional maid was brought on to manage the large group of people visiting. But this maid's quarters, it's to the rear of the house, also right next to the cleaning closet and rear staircase, which most of your help would have probably used the rear staircase and not your formal front staircase. In this room, we had about 4 layers of wallpaper.
Okay.
We scraped to the original plaster. We see some evidence of repairs, not uncommon in old houses. This particular wall at the 1903 fire saw significant damage going up to the attic.
Okay.
So it's not surprising that the plaster was repaired somewhere along the line. And also, the floors, you can see, are just painted pine, whereas the rest of the house has the oak veneer floors.
Right.
So again, it would have been more of a utility type room. What we plan to do with this room is actually exhibit what a typical maid's quarters would have looked like. We have
Sure.
a day bed coming that one of our volunteer members are having restored for us.
Mm-hmm.
We have a nice oak secretary, and we have a beautiful sewing machine. Both those pieces were donated by Mike and Mary Jo Morris. And we know the sewing machine came from the Feckley Foundation, or excuse me, the Feckley family.
Neat.
Frank Feckley was a Ford dealer many years in Medina, and his home was on South Court Street. So it's nice to see some of the local pieces that have some significance
Right.
come. And although sewing machines were fairly common, we imagine the seamstress duties here would have been pretty significant, because you had many women's dresses and top, blouses and things
Sure.
of that nature, plus the children's clothing. Again, they didn't throw anything away, as we found in the attic. We found mittens and scarves and blouses from the various ages of the children and the adults. So I imagine the maid was kept pretty busy
Pretty
here.
busy, yeah.
And if you weren't doing that, you were hauling firewood or coal up and down to stoking the furnace, perhaps. So using that dumbwaiter for things like that.
Other than grandma.
Other than grandma, yes. Although the later years, that evidently was a duty of the maid. So
What I think is kind of interesting about homes of this period is today we're about open concepts and large rooms and big furniture. But as you start to look around this room, there are 2 massive windows. There's a radiator that takes up a whole wall. There's the entryway from which Mike is filming us, and there's a closet door behind you. So as you start to think, how is this room used? And you're right. I mean, there was maybe room for a single bed or even a tinier bed here. Maybe the dresser went on that wall, but it would have been a very sparse room.
correct.
Only with the bare essentials. Other than the beauty of the wallpaper and the heat, this was utilitarian. This was definitely secondary space from what the family showed up front and in which they lived.
There was good natural light in the room again. If you were sewing or doing other
Yes.
maintenance, whether it's taking care of the shoes or things like that for the family, you had some good natural light coming in this room too, which I think was an advantage that they probably planned out. And the maids would have been responsible for keeping the family's wardrobe intact. So it's interesting history. I think it's going to be an interesting room. It won't be as fancy and ornate.
Right.
It'll be very functional looking, but it will also help tell the story that what you did back in the days when you just didn't have Kohl's down the street to go get a new set of shoes or clothing. You made do with what you had.
We're back upstairs here in one of what we think was a bedroom, although it's a little bit unusual that it has this fancy plaster trim that we've discussed before. But also, this is one of the rooms in the museum, as this becomes a museum as part of the Medina County Historical Society, that really showcases business and industry from around Medina County. There's some beautiful pieces in here, certainly documenting the rich history of Root Candle and the Root family, some things from different hardware stores and things around town. So Brian, tell me a little bit about this room and what you hope to achieve when you're able to open as a museum.
Well, this collection has always been one of our premier interests at the John Smart House. Many people would visit this room and see items that recall from their youth or perhaps their parents or grandparents. We have items from the Henry Furnace Company. Medina had several furnace companies, heavy manufacturing that came in after the railroads, including John Smart's hollowware factory, the furnace factories. All those were important as housing became more affordable.
Right.
People went to more coal-fired furnaces versus fireplaces. So furnace industry was pretty important in town. But we also have some long-standing insurance companies that were here for many, many years. The Tubbs Agency. And when Don Tubbs closed the business, he donated many interesting items from that industry to us. Of course, we have the Farmers Insurance Company, which later became Westfield. We have a lot of memorabilia from that organization, as well as interesting things like a wooden bowling ball. I didn't know they made such a thing. But on the top of this cabinet is actually a wood bowling ball that was in a bowling alley on South Court Street, near where the Time Restaurant parking lot is today.
Really?
So
wow.
There's all kinds of interesting things that often people stop to look. The American House was a large hotel on the corner of the square where we have currently Bicentennial Park. The phone came out of the American House. So just some interesting collections here. And this is only a sampling of what we have. So again, the reason this house was so interesting for us is that it provided a relief from the overcrowding at John Smart House. And now we're able to really share with the public so many interesting things we have about the county history.
And I think it's pretty cool. Certainly Medina has a rich history of being captured in photographs, but I think people really respond to the tactile ephemera things from the businesses. They kind of bring them to life. You know, for something to survive 100 years, 120 years, whatever, that's pretty cool. I love the signs. Tebbett's Ice Cream, people still talk about that.
Absolutely.
You know, the signs over there and just the wonderful things. And we really look forward to, as do you, to opening the house as you see them.
I remember
getting people inside.
Tebbett's was the only place in town just about you could get ice or beer, long before convenience stores came along or grocery stores carried those kinds of items. So that was a very important function. Again, it derived from the Bowman's Ice Pond, which was a big supplier of ice and coal over on Liberty Street. So it's just how these things kind of evolved, and savvy business people took advantage of those opportunities. And I just think it tells an interesting story. Having a business background, I just find manufacturing and marketing of products even 100 years ago fascinating.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Brian, so much. We hope you'll join us next time when the wallpaper in the dining room, which has finally arrived, that lower half, that should be completed. Probably some more investigation in that entry hall and uncovering some more of the history and mysteries of McDowell Phillips House. Thanks for joining us.